It was the first time she had ever flown alone. A young girl, full of excitement yet nervous at the same time, looked around the busy airport. Her parents had made sure she was ready for the journey, giving her tips on what to do and what to expect. She had always been independent, but this was a big step. Her destination was her grandmother's house, a place she loved to visit during the summer. She went through security, found her gate, and waited for the announcement that would call her to board. She thought about her mom's instructions one last time. Be calm, polite, and always ask for help if she needed it. The idea of flying alone felt a little overwhelming, but she was determined to manage it. As the boarding process started, she lined up with the other passengers and showed her ticket to the gate agent. The plane was just like the ones she had seen in the movies, big and sleek, and as she boarded she couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. It was an adventure, something new and exciting. Her seat was near the window so she could look out at the clouds and the ground far below. She liked being able to see the world from up high, something that always made her feel a little more grown up. The flight attendants greeted everyone as they boarded. They were all smiling and friendly, walking up and down the aisles, helping passengers with their luggage. The girl tried to get comfortable in her seat, adjusting the tray table in front of her and buckling her seatbelt. She glanced around at the other passengers, some of whom were deep in conversation, while others seemed to be lost in their own thoughts. She was alone, but it didn't bother her much. When the flight began to taxi, the girl felt the thrill of takeoff. As the plane lifted off the ground, she pressed her face to the window, watching as the city grew smaller and smaller beneath her. She had heard so much about flying, but hadn't expected it to feel so surreal. The air felt different up here, like she was in a world all her own. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. But as the flight attendants began their routine checks, one of them approached her. The girl hadn't noticed the woman before, but she saw her now. The flight attendant was in her mid-40s with blonde hair and a well-practiced smile. She looked at the young girl and asked, "Is this your first flight?" Her tone was polite, but something about her made the girl feel uneasy. The young girl nodded, managing a small smile. "Yes," she replied, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. "Well, I hope you're comfortable. Just let me know if you need anything," the flight attendant said, her eyes scanning the rest of the cabin. As the woman moved on to the next row, the girl felt a little relief. Maybe it was just her imagination, but there was something about the flight attendant's gaze that had made her feel uncomfortable. She shook it off, deciding it was nothing. After all, everyone on the plane had been friendly so far. She settled back into her seat, trying to relax. But as the hours passed, the young girl couldn't help but notice how the same flight attendant kept walking by her row, glancing at her with what seemed like a judgmental stare. It wasn't like the other attendants who were busy helping other passengers or moving down the aisles without much attention to anyone in particular. This one seemed to keep coming back to her, and each time there was that same look. The girl couldn't explain it, but it made her feel uneasy. It wasn't just the way the flight attendant looked at her either. It was the way she spoke when she did interact with her. Once, when the girl asked for a glass of water, the flight attendant didn't respond with a smile. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you sure you need water now?" "It's a long flight." The girl felt a bit taken aback. She hadn't asked for much, just a simple glass of water. But now it seemed like something more was going on. The flight attendant's voice was sharp, a tone that the girl had never heard before on a flight. She tried to brush it off, telling herself she was being overly sensitive. Maybe the woman was just having a bad day. However, as the flight continued, it was clear that it wasn't just a one-time thing. The flight attendant's behavior started to feel more intentional. Every time she came near the girl's seat, the look in her eyes seemed more focused. Once, when the girl shifted in her seat to get more comfortable, the attendant stood nearby for a moment too long, as if waiting for her to make a mistake. The girl began to feel like she was being watched. She wasn't sure why the woman was acting this way. Was it because of something she had done? Or was it the hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity? The young girl tried to distract herself by looking out the window, but it was hard to focus on anything when she kept feeling the weight of the flight attendant's gaze. Every time the woman walked past, her eyes seemed to lock onto the girl's seat for just a moment too long. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unsettling. The girl began to feel like she was trapped in a situation she couldn't escape from. She had never been in a position like this before. Back at home, she was always taught to treat people with kindness and respect. Her parents had raised her to believe that everyone deserved the benefit of the doubt. But now, on this flight, it felt like the flight attendant wasn't extending that same respect toward her. The young girl didn't know what to do. She didn't want to make trouble, but how could she let this go on? She had been taught to stay quiet, to avoid confrontation. But something about the flight attendant's attitude made it hard to stay silent. It wasn't just the comments anymore. It was the way the woman was making her feel. Every interaction with her seemed calculated, as if the flight attendant was deliberately trying to make her feel small. The girl tried to push the feeling away. She reminded herself that she was a good person, that she didn't deserve to be treated this way, but it didn't stop the sting of each passing moment. Finally, the flight attendant came around again. This time, the girl asked for a snack, hoping it would be a simple interaction. She needed something, anything, to break the tension, but as the flight attendant handed her the snack, she leaned in close, her voice low but still audible enough for the girl to hear. "You should be more careful. People like you always make a scene." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. The girl tried to blink back tears. Why was this happening? What had she done to deserve this kind of treatment? She didn't feel like causing trouble. She just wanted to get through the flight and visit her grandmother. But now it seemed like the woman was picking at her every chance she got. The flight attendant moved on, but the girl couldn't shake the words. They echoed in her head, repeating over and over again. "People like you always make a scene." What did that mean? Did she mean because of the way she looked? The girl was starting to feel more and more isolated, as if she was different in some way she didn't understand. She glanced around, hoping to find some kind of comfort in the faces of the other passengers. But everyone seemed to be focused on their own things. No one seemed to notice what was happening. It felt like the entire cabin was against her. She tried to remind herself that it was probably just her nerves playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just her imagination. She was being singled out, and it hurt. By the time the plane was cruising at a steady altitude, the girl couldn't take it anymore. She needed to go to the bathroom. Anything to get away from the flight attendant, even if just for a few minutes. As she stood up and walked down the aisle, she kept her head down, trying to avoid the gaze of anyone else. The bathroom was small, and it gave her a brief moment of relief. She washed her hands slowly, staring at her reflection in the mirror, trying to calm her nerves. When she returned to her seat, she saw the flight attendant again. The woman was standing in the aisle, waiting as if she were expecting the girl. The young girl's heart sank. She hadn't done anything wrong, so why did it feel like she was being watched? "Back so soon?" the flight attendant asked with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe you should stay in your seat next time. Not all of us have time for little trips." The girl's stomach twisted. She tried to stay calm, but the words stung. She wasn't sure what the woman meant by them, but she could feel the sharpness in her tone. It was as if the flight attendant was constantly finding reasons to criticize her, no matter how small the action. She looked around, hoping to see someone who would step in, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone was busy, and the girl was left to face the woman's condescending words alone. The rest of the flight felt like a blur. Each time the flight attendant passed by, the girl felt a knot in her stomach. The young girl didn't know how much longer she could endure the woman's treatment, but she was starting to feel that there was no escape. As the plane began its descent toward the flight attendant's face shifted slightly as the man's words hit her. For a moment she seemed unsure how to respond, but then a defensive look flashed across her face and she quickly turned her attention to the man who had spoken out. "What are you implying?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "I'm just doing my job." The older man didn't back down. "Doing your job would mean treating everyone with respect," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "And from what I've seen, that's not what's happening here." The young girl, still seated in her chair, couldn't believe what was happening. The flight attendant, who had been so dismissive and cold to her, was now on the defensive. She could see how that the woman's composure was starting to crack under the pressure of the man's words. But instead of feeling victorious, the girl just felt a sense of confusion. Was this really happening? Was she really being stood up for? The older man turned toward her and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice kind. The girl nodded, too shocked to speak, but she appreciated the stranger's kindness more than she could put into words. The flight attendant, now clearly uncomfortable, stood still for a few moments, trying to regain her composure. But the other passengers who had been minding their own business were beginning to take notice. Whispers spread through the cabin, and the air grew thick with tension. It was as if the entire plane had collectively held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. "Listen," the flight attendant said, her voice trembling slightly now. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything wrong." But the older man wasn't having any of it. He shook his head, his expression stern. "Don't pretend you didn't. Everyone around here saw how you've treated her. If you don't have anything kind to say, maybe you should step away. You're not being professional." The girl could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It wasn't just the words. It was the fact that someone was finally standing up for her. She had felt so small for the past few hours, so insignificant in the face of the flight attendant's treatment. But now, for the first time, she felt a sense of power that had been missing before. She wasn't invisible anymore. The flight attendant's face flushed a deep red, and she glanced around the cabin, no longer able to hide the unease in her eyes. The passengers who had been silent before were now watching the interaction intently. It was clear that the atmosphere had shifted. No longer was the girl the only one who felt uncomfortable. The flight attendant was now the focus of everyone's attention. As the plane continued to descend, the flight attendant walked down the aisle without saying another word to the girl. The older man, after making sure the girl was all right, gave a small nod of encouragement before he also took his seat for the landing. The girl sat there, processing what had just happened. She still didn't fully understand why the flight attendant had treated her that way, but she did understand one thing. She wasn't alone. As the plane touched down and the fasten seatbelt sign clicked off, the girl stood up, gathering her things in a daze. She was still trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that had taken over her. What had started as an exciting adventure had turned into a whirlwind of discomfort and confusion. But now, with the flight attendant gone and the ordeal over, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. As she stepped off the plane, she looked around at the crowd of passengers. There were people chatting, some rushing to catch connecting flights, others heading to baggage claim. But for a moment, the young girl felt like she was the only one who mattered in the world. The interaction with the flight attendant, the words that had been said, and the kindness of the stranger had all left an impression on her that she would never forget. It was only when she reached the gate that she felt the weight of the experience. She had to wait for her grandmother to pick her up, and as she sat in the airport terminal, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. It wasn't just about what had happened on the plane. It was about how the days following the flight were a whirlwind. The young girl had tried to put the experience behind her, but it lingered in her mind. It wasn't the kindness of the older man that kept resurfacing. It was the lingering sting of how she had been treated. How had she been so easily overlooked by the flight attendant? Why had she been made to feel so small for something she couldn't control? She thought about it in her quiet moments, especially when she found herself alone at her grandmother's house. Her grandmother could tell something was bothering her. The girl was quieter than usual, lost in her thoughts. The cheerful conversations at dinner felt strained, and the laughter she usually shared with her grandmother was missing. It was hard to pretend everything was fine when there was so much swirling around in her head. One afternoon, her grandmother sat down next to her on the porch. The girl had been watching the sunset, lost in the orange and pink hues painting the sky. It was the kind of peaceful moment that usually brought comfort, but today, it just felt distant. "You've been quiet lately," her grandmother said, her voice gentle but filled with understanding. "Something's on your mind. Do you want to talk about it?" The girl hesitated for a moment, then looked at her grandmother. The safe, warm smile on her grandmother's face gave her the courage to speak up. "It's just the flight. I keep thinking about it. What happened with the flight attendant?" She paused. "I still don't understand why she treated me that way. It wasn't just that she was rude. It was like she thought I didn't belong." "I don't get it." Her grandmother nodded slowly, taking in her words. "I know that feeling, sweetheart," she said softly. "People sometimes let their own fears or biases get in the way of seeing others for who they truly are. The girl furrowed her brow. But why would she do that to me? Her grandmother sighed, her voice growing more serious. Sometimes people make assumptions based on things they don't understand. Maybe she didn't know you, didn't see you as an individual, and let that shape how she treated you. It doesn't make it right, but that's often the case. People can be quick to judge, especially when they don't take the time to understand. The girl thought about that for a moment. It was hard to accept that someone had treated her that way because of assumptions they had made. But her grandmother's words helped her put it into perspective. She wasn't the one who had made a mistake. The flight attendant was. The girl hadn't done anything to deserve that treatment. It was about the flight attendant's behavior, not hers. I don't know why, but it felt personal, like she thought I was a problem. The girl said, her voice thick with emotion. Like she was just waiting for me to do something wrong. Her grandmother gave her hand a gentle squeeze. That's the hard part about people's biases. They can make others feel like they don't belong. But you know something? You don't need to let someone else's narrow view of you define who you are. You are worthy of respect, no matter what anyone else thinks or says. The girl nodded, feeling the weight of her grandmother's words sink in. I just don't get why she singled me out. Why me? Her grandmother smiled, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. Sometimes when people feel insecure or unsure, they try to make others feel small to feel better about themselves. But that's not your fault, and it doesn't change who you are. What matters is how you rise above it, how you carry yourself. Don't let anyone else's view of you become your reality. The girl's heart lifted just a little at her grandmother's words. There was something comforting about the idea that she could still be in control of her own story, no matter how others treated her. She didn't have to internalize the hurt, the judgment, or the assumptions made about her. Her value wasn't defined by a stranger's actions. It was something much deeper than that. As the week went on, the girl found herself slowly letting go of the feelings of shame and confusion that had weighed on her during the flight. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could choose how she responded to it. She began to see the experience differently, not as a mark against her, but as a reminder of how important it was to treat others with kindness and empathy, no matter their background, appearance, or differences. One afternoon, while shopping with her grandmother in a local store, the girl overheard a conversation between two women at the checkout counter. They were talking about a recent flight they had been on, and the girl's curiosity piqued. As the conversation unfolded, she realized that one of the women was recounting a story that was eerily similar to her own. I couldn't believe how rude the flight attendant was, one woman said. She seemed to target a young girl just for being different. It was uncomfortable to watch. The other woman nodded in agreement. I don't understand why people act like that. It's like they see someone who doesn't look like them and immediately decide they don't belong. It's terrible. The girl, who had been standing a few feet away, felt her heart race. She wasn't sure if the women were talking about her flight, but something about the conversation made her stop in her tracks. The words hit her hard. They weren't talking about a random person. They were talking about a situation they had witnessed on the same flight. For the first time, the girl realized she wasn't the only one who had noticed the flight attendant's behavior. The women at the counter were talking about it like it was a shared experience, something that had left them disturbed too. The flight attendant's behavior had left an impression, not just on the girl, but on others who had witnessed it as well. The girl's emotions swirled. As the girl sat on the porch of her grandmother's house, watching the evening sun dip below the horizon. It was one of those peaceful moments when the world seemed to slow down, and everything felt calm and still. Yet despite the serene surroundings, her mind was busy. The events of the flight still played in her mind. Like a broken record she couldn't turn off. As much as she wanted to move past it, the flight attendant's words and the way she had been treated had to weigh heavily on her heart. But there was something different about today. She felt a quiet sense of strength that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just because of the older man who had stood up for her, or even her grandmother's comforting words. It was something deeper, something inside of her that had shifted. She realized now that she didn't need anyone else's validation to feel good about herself. Her grandmother came outside, sitting next to her, "You've been quiet today," she said, her voice gentle. "I've just been thinking," the girl replied, staring at the fading light. "About the flight, and everything that happened." Her grandmother nodded, understanding that the girl had been reflecting on the past few days. "I think about what happened on that flight sometimes too," her grandmother said, her voice soft but firm. "But you have to remember, it wasn't about you. It was about the actions of someone else, and those actions don't define you." The girl looked at her grandmother. "I know. I guess it's just hard to forget." Her grandmother smiled, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's not about forgetting. It's about learning from it and choosing how to move forward." The girl felt the truth of her grandmother's words sink in. Moving forward. That was what she needed to do. The past few days had been filled with emotional turmoil, but today she felt a sense of peace. Maybe it was because she knew she wasn't alone. Maybe it was because she had learned that even in uncomfortable situations, she had the power to stand tall. Later that week, the girl and her grandmother went out to a local cafe. As they sat down, the girl noticed a woman sitting alone at a nearby table reading a book. The woman looked familiar, but it took a moment for the girl to realize who she was. It was the flight attendant, the very one who had treated her so poorly. For a moment, the girl froze. Her mind raced. Should she approach her? Should she say something? After everything that had happened, part of her wanted to let the woman know how she had felt, how much the flight attendant's behavior had affected her. But another part of her, the part that was learning to rise above the situation, knew that saying anything wouldn't change what had happened. Her grandmother, who had noticed the woman as well, gently touched her hand. "Are you okay?" The girl nodded slowly, her heart beating a little faster. "Yeah," she said. I don't know what to do." "She's right there." Her grandmother gave her a knowing smile. "You don't need to do anything. You've already done everything you need to do. The fact that you're here today feeling strong, The girl woke up early the next morning, the soft rays of the sun filtering through her bedroom window. She could hear birds chirping outside, and for the first time in a while, the peacefulness of the morning brought her a sense of calm. The events of the flight and the days that had followed seemed far behind now, though they had left their mark on her. She knew she would always remember what had happened, but it didn't weigh as heavily on her anymore. As she made her way to the kitchen, her grandmother was already up, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. The familiar comfort of her grandmother's presence was a balm for her heart. It was through moments like these, quiet, ordinary moments, that the girl realized how much strength she had gained. It wasn't about the dramatic confrontations or the grand gestures. It was about the little choices, the moments of peace, and the confidence she had found within herself. Her grandmother smiled at her as she entered the room. "Good morning, sweetheart. You look like you're in a good mood today." The girl smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in days. "I am," she said simply. "I think I'm finally starting to let go of everything." Her grandmother nodded knowingly. "That's the thing about growing up," she said. "You learn that some things are better left behind. The hurt, the anger, the frustration, they can all follow you if you let them. But if you make the choice to leave them behind, you become stronger for it." The girl took a deep breath, feeling the truth of her grandmother's words resonate within her. It wasn't just about letting go of the flight attendant's actions. It was about letting go of all the negativity that had been weighing her down for so long. She wasn't going to carry that burden anymore. Later that afternoon, the girl went to the park to meet some friends. They were talking and laughing, enjoying the sunny weather. As they sat on a bench, one of her friends mentioned something that made the girl pause. "You know," her friend said, "I saw a video on the news about a flight attendant being fired. Apparently, she had treated a passenger badly on a flight and people were really upset about it." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if this was the same flight attendant, but the situation sounded eerily familiar. She didn't want to assume anything, but the story lingered in her mind. Later that day, as she was walking home with her grandmother, the girl brought it up. "Grandma, I think I heard something about the flight attendant on the news today. They said she got fired. I don't know if it's the same one, but it sounded like it." Her grandmother stopped walking for a moment, turning to look at her. "I've heard some things too," she said thoughtfully. "I don't know if it's the same person, but sometimes when people do things that hurt others, there are consequences. You can't just treat people badly and expect nothing to happen." The girl nodded, her thoughts swirling. Part of her felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that the flight attendant's actions hadn't gone unnoticed. But another part of her felt conflicted. She didn't want anyone to lose their job. She didn't want to be the cause of someone's downfall, even if they had wronged her. Her grandmother, sensing the girl's unease, put a hand on her shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "What happened on that flight was out of your control. But what you do with it, that's your choice. If someone else made a mistake, that's on them, not you." The girl took a deep breath. "I know, I don't want to be the reason someone loses their job. But at the same time, I don't think anyone should treat people that way." Her grandmother smiled warmly. "You're wise beyond your years," she said. "It's not easy to find balance in situations like this. You're learning that what's most important is how you handle yourself, and you've handled this with grace and strength. No matter what happens next, that's what matters." The girl smiled, feeling the warmth of her grandmother's words seep into her heart. She wasn't sure what the future held for the flight attendant, but she knew that she had done everything she could to rise above the situation. She hadn't let it define her. She had taken the higher road, and that was something she could be proud of. As the days passed, the girl began to notice something else. Her confidence was growing. It wasn't just about the flight anymore. It was about everything. She felt more comfortable in her own skin, more certain of her place in the world. She had learned that the opinions of others didn't have to define her. What mattered most was how she saw herself and how she treated others. One afternoon, as she walked down the street, she passed a woman standing at a bus stop. The woman looked familiar, and as the girl walked closer, she realized it was the same flight attendant who had treated her so badly. The woman was standing alone, her shoulders slumped, looking tired and dejected. For a moment, the girl felt a pang of sympathy. She remembered how she had felt on that flight, how she had been treated like she didn't belong. But now, looking at the flight attendant, she realized that people who treat others poorly are often dealing with their own struggles. The woman's head was bowed, and she didn't notice the girl as she passed by. The girl could have walked past without a second thought, but something inside her stirred. Without fully understanding why, she stopped and turned back. She walked up to the woman, who looked up in surprise. "Excuse me," the girl said softly. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm okay. I know things were difficult on the flight, but I've moved on. I hope you find peace too." The woman looked at her, a mixture of surprise and guilt flashing across her face. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you," she said, her voice quiet. I don't know what came over me. I wish I could take it back." The girl smiled gently. "It's okay," she said. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them and moving forward." For a moment, the two of them stood there, silently acknowledging the past. Then the woman nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I won't forget this." As the girl walked away, she felt a quiet sense of closure. She had done what she needed to do, not for the flight attendant, but for herself. She had let go of the hurt, and in doing so, she had found a deeper understanding of herself and others. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing bad behavior. It was about freeing herself from the weight of anger and pain. The girl knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She wasn't just the girl who had been treated unfairly on a flight. She was someone who had learned, grown, and found peace in the midst of adversity. And as she walked away, her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. She had let go of the past and embraced the future. She had learned that her worth wasn't determined by how others saw her. It was something much deeper, a strength that came from within. Be at peace is all that matters. What you choose to do next is entirely up to you. You don't have to let this situation control you. You're in charge now. The girl looked back at the woman, still lost in her book. Part of her felt the urge to say something, maybe confront her, explain how her actions had made her feel. But the other part of her realized that confronting the woman wouldn't bring her peace. The woman had already shown who she was through her actions, and nothing the girl said could change that. Instead, the girl took a deep breath and decided to focus on herself. "I'm not going to let this moment define me," the girl whispered to herself. It was a quiet promise, but one she knew she could keep. After a few minutes, the woman got up to leave. She didn't notice the girl or her grandmother, and the girl didn't feel the need to say anything. She wasn't looking for an apology. She didn't need the flight attendant's validation. The girl had come to terms with the situation on her own. She had learned that her worth wasn't tied to someone else's actions. She was strong and worthy of respect regardless of how anyone else treated her. Later that evening, the girl sat in her room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The initial shock, the hurt, the anger, those feelings had all been real, but they were fading now. What remained was a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that she hadn't known she possessed. She didn't need anyone's approval to know her value. She had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity, and that strength would stay with her for the rest of her life. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. It's about learning from it and choosing how to move forward. As she lay in bed that night, the girl smiled softly to herself. She wasn't just moving forward, she was thriving. The experience on the flight had been tough, but it had taught her something invaluable. She didn't need anyone's permission to be who she was. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She was enough just as she was. The next day, as she walked down the street with her grandmother, she felt lighter than she had in days. The weight of the past few days had lifted, replaced with a quiet strength. She felt empowered, ready to face whatever came her way. The world hadn't been kind in that moment on the plane, but she had learned how to hold her head high no matter what. And for the first time in a long while, she realized that the only person who needed to validate her worth was herself. He wanted to speak up, to tell them that it was her they were talking about, but she hesitated, unsure if it was the right moment. She didn't need their sympathy. What she needed was for people to understand that no one should ever be treated that way. Her grandmother, who had been listening quietly, noticed her reaction. "What's on your mind?" she asked, gently touching her shoulder. The girl hesitated for a moment before answering. "I think they're talking about the flight." "About me." Her grandmother's eyes softened. "You're not alone, sweetheart. What happened to you on that flight? It was wrong. And it seems like others saw it too. That tells you something important. It wasn't about you. It was about the person who treated you unfairly. And no one should ever treat someone like that." The girl took a deep breath, her grandmother's words reassuring her once again. She had been made to feel like she was the only one affected, but hearing the women talk about their own discomfort gave her a sense of solidarity. The world wasn't silent. It wasn't just her who had noticed the injustice, it was others too. As they left the store, the girl couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of empowerment. She had been wronged, but she didn't have to carry that pain with her. She had the power to move forward, to rise above the hurt, and to know that she was deserving of respect. And most importantly, she had learned that there were people who cared, people who would stand up for what was right, even when it was hard to do so. Felt during it all. She had felt alone, small, and as if the entire world was against her. But that moment when the older man had stood up for her had shifted everything. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to accept poor treatment because of the way she looked or who she was, and that realization gave her a sense of pride. Her grandmother arrived soon after, her warm smile and open arms providing a safe haven after the tense experience. As they drove home, the girl quietly told her grandmother about the flight. She didn't go into great detail, but the important part was clear. She had been treated unfairly, but someone had stepped in to help. Her grandmother listened carefully, nodding in understanding. "I'm so proud of you for handling that situation with such grace," she said, her voice full of pride. "You never should have had to go through that, but sometimes people will try to make you feel small. And it's important to remember that it's not about you. It's about them." The girl nodded, feeling the truth in her grandmother's words. She hadn't known how to stand up for herself in that moment. But now, in the comfort of her grandmother's presence, she could see it more clearly. The flight attendant's behavior hadn't been her fault. It had been a reflection of the flight attendant's own biases and assumptions, not something the girl deserved, and she wasn't going to let that experience define her. As the car pulled into the driveway of her grandmother's house, the girl felt a sense of calm wash over her. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been a lesson. She would never forget how it felt to be mistreated for something she couldn't control, but she also wouldn't forget the kindness of a stranger who had spoken up when no one else would. It reminded her that even in the toughest of situations, there was always a chance for someone to make a difference. She would always carry that lesson with her. Never be afraid to stand up for yourself and always be ready to stand up for others who might need it. Their destination? She couldn't help but wonder if the flight would ever end. She tried to push the thoughts out of her head, telling herself that it would be over soon. She just had to hold on a little longer. But even as the plane began to land, She felt the weight of everything that had happened on that flight. It wasn't just the flight attendant's words. It was the way she had made her feel from the moment she stepped on board. The young girl had come on this flight full of excitement and anticipation, but now all she could feel was exhaustion. Exhaustion from the emotional toll of the day. As the plane landed and the passengers began to gather their belongings, the girl stayed seated for a moment longer. She wanted to wait for the crowd to thin out, but deep down she was hoping to avoid the flight attendant. She didn't want to make any more eye contact or have another interaction that would leave her feeling worse. But then something unexpected happened. A passenger seated nearby stood up, catching the attention of the flight attendant. The man was older with a calm demeanor. He had been watching the entire situation unfold, and as he looked at the flight attendant, the girl could see the disappointment in his eyes. He took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me," he said. "I've been watching how you've treated that young girl, and frankly, I don't think it's acceptable." The flight attendant blinked, clearly surprised. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice defensive. "I've seen the way you've treated her, the cold remarks, the judgment." "It's not right," the man said. His voice was steady, but there was a certain authority in it. The young girl, though still nervous, felt a tiny spark of hope. Someone had noticed. Someone else saw what had been happening, and for the first time during the entire flight, she felt like she wasn't alone. She had been silently enduring the cruel behavior, thinking she had no power to change it. But now, with the support of this stranger, maybe things would finally start to change. As the flight attendant's attitude, she wasn't sure, but every interaction with her made the girl more uncomfortable. At one point, the girl asked if she could go to the bathroom. The flight attendant nodded, but there was a noticeable hesitation before she motioned for her to go ahead. It was subtle, but the girl could feel it. When she returned, the flight attendant was right there again, standing in the aisle as the girl made her way back to her seat. "You're not causing trouble, are you?" the flight attendant asked, her voice dripping with judgment. The young girl froze, her face flushed with embarrassment. Why was she being treated like this? What had she done wrong? She couldn't understand it. She wasn't causing trouble. She wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. But somehow she was being treated as if she was. The girl turned back to her seat, her stomach in knots. She wanted to speak up, to say something about how she was feeling, but she didn't know how. The idea of causing a scene made her anxious, and the last thing she wanted was to make the situation worse. But it was becoming clear that the flight attendant had no intention of letting up. The young girl felt a deep sense of frustration growing inside her. She had never been treated this way before, and she didn't understand why this was happening. It was a moment she would never forget. A moment that would change how she saw the world and how she interacted with people in authority. As the flight continued, she found herself wondering, was it just her imagination, or was she really being singled out because of who she was? She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right.